So picture this. It is a long time ago, before I had any pairs of Jordans. Thanks for that, Ryan. But my wife and I had just bought a new house. And by new house, I mean this place was a dumpster fire. It was trash. So we had to gut this thing and kind of start over. We went down to the drywall, new floors, all that kind of stuff. Now, because of the way that like the loan process worked and our lease in the old place, there was one day on the calendar that we could actually move into this house. And that date was December 26th. Okay? Yeah, you guys are all already there with me. Now, here's the other part of that problem. We had kids at the time. And so you know what happens on December 25th, right? The house explodes. There's wrapping paper everywhere. There's stuff. And so the same thing happened with us, but we had most of our stuff packed. Christmas Day happens. Our daughter opens up all her presents, and she's super excited. And we're like, okay, we're going to be the cool parents. You can play with all your toys except for one, okay? There's just one that we need you to wait until we move. And so we immediately went from being the cool parents to the absolute worst, because obviously this is the one toy she wanted to play with more than any of the others. What it was an art set that had an easel. And so the problem was that some assembly required, we would have to put this thing together, then we would have to move it the very next day. So we're out on that process. So after some negotiations, we put it in the moving truck and moved on with our lives. The next day, December 26th, we moved to the new apartment, and it takes us all day. I'm talking about sun up to sundown. My daughter, whose name I almost said accidentally, my daughter did not see us that day. She stayed with some family and came home already asleep. The next day, December 27th, was a Sunday. And I was working in ministry. I was on the worship team, so I had to be to church early. So I woke up before the rest of my house, and I went to church. Okay, and I'm getting ready for everything. We do the first service. Everything's great. And in the middle of the second service, I get a phone call from my wife. And she knows where I'm at. That never happens. I'm like, this is something. And so I answer the phone, and I'm like, hello. She goes, I just need to tell you that your daughter, and she did that whole year, just my daughter in the situation. It's not our daughter. Your daughter, she opened the art set. And I'm like, okay, what happened? She goes, she spilled paint on the carpet. Now, this carpet was 3 days old and very light in color. She spilled paint. And I know you're just thinking right now, you're like, oh, probably like the little watercolor set. She probably got some. No, these are 4-ounce jars of paint. And she spilled 2 of them, the red one and the blue one, together. All right, so now we've got this amazing just rainbow of color. And I said to my wife, I'm like, what'd you do? Did you get it cleaned up? And she goes, I can't. She's locked herself in the bedroom and won't open the door. And I'm like, what? She's like, she's not letting me in. I'm like, check the thing to see if there's any of those skeleton keys. Of course, there were none. She had to call her dad, who thankfully at the time lived about a mile away from us. He came down, picks the lock, and they spend hours getting this paint as much out of the carpet as they can. And I don't know who lives there now, but probably to this day, there's probably like a purple halo there. And my daughter had to sit on the bed for hours and watch them do it, like there was no fun involved. So all of her Christmas presents just in full view were the worst, right? But here's the thing that I kind of understood about that. Well, I still don't understand. She locked herself in the bedroom, and I don't know what the plan was. Was she just like, well, this is where I live now. Maybe they'll forget that I'm here. I don't know. But she knew. What happened was she knew she had messed up really bad and that she could not clean this mess up on her own. And so instead of coming for help, she locked herself away, right? And that's easy for us to like, oh, it's a funny story about a child. But haven't we all been there before? Have you ever been in a situation or in a mess that you made that you know you can't clean up on your own? I know for me, it looked like this. In high school, my senior year, one of my friends was like, hey man, let's go out of town for the weekend. We can go down to my hometown. It was about an hour away. We'll just hang out with some friends. We'll have some fun. We'll come back. I'm like, cool, that sounds like fun. So I get in the car with him when we leave town for the weekend. The problem with that was that we left town on a Wednesday. And so I had missed 2 days of school, 2 days of work, no call, no show. No one knows where I'm at. And I'm just gone for 5 days. And I knew that there was going to come a time where I had to go back, where I had to figure out what I was going to do with this mess that I made. And instead of doing that, I decided, hey, doesn't your cousin live around here? She's got a place. Like, can we just stay there? Like, just live there? And so we show up at her house, and I'm sitting on this couch. And I knew that, like, as far as my current outlook goes, this couch is where I live. Like, this is my whole area. And then things got really bad. They started making dinner, and they wouldn't share. So now I'm hungry. I've got no money, probably no job, nowhere to go because I've burned every bridge in the process. Thankfully, There was a knock on the door, and it was a good friend who dragged me out and said, this will not be where you go from here. But I still knew that in that moment, I had a hard road ahead. And I wondered if anybody even actually cared where I was. But it taught me so much, and it taught me what I hope we can all learn today is this: no matter where you are, Jesus wants you to come home. See, we're in this series called Quest 52, where we're spending an entire year looking at the life of Jesus. We spent the first part talking about the person of Jesus, like who was this man? We spent the second part talking about the power of Jesus. What did he do? And now we're in this section, the preaching of Jesus, where we're learning from his public ministry, from the conversations he had, the sermons that he delivered, and what he said while he was on earth. And I hope that today, no matter where you are, you'll lean in. Whether you feel like you've made a mess, or whether you feel like you've come through it to the other side, and there's a lot of people in your life that should work on cleaning up their messes, I hope that you'll lean in today, because I know that God has something for you. And I know that today he's going to show you a little bit more about who he is. He's going to show you a little bit more of his heart for you and how he feels about people that are far from him. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 15. This is one of my favorite passages of scripture. And while you turn there, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. As the chapter opens, we see that Jesus is being approached by all kinds of people. I mean, men, women, children, soldiers, sinners, religious elite. Everybody's gathering around this man because they want to hear what he has to say. Some came for healing, some came for salvation, and others, like the religious elite, were listening to his every word so that they could find the one mistake that would give them cause to put him to death. Jesus welcomes everyone in, all of them, including those religious elite. But some in that crowd weren't so welcoming. You see, there were some cultural barriers at play. This was a Jewish community, and Jewish people didn't hang out with, anybody else. They didn't associate with Gentiles. They didn't associate with sinners or tax collectors or soldiers or those who were considered unclean. They had some questions as to why Jesus would spend time with those people. And they actually go so far as to express this disapproval out loud. I'm like, can you believe this guy? And I just imagine Jesus going, and they're like, and he answers this question. But he doesn't just tell them the answer. He tells them a story. Not just any story, he tells them a story, a string of 3 stories. And it took me a while to try to figure out why that was. Like, if you ask Jesus 2 + 2, he's not going to say 4. He's probably going to be like, there was a farmer. And this farmer had an apple tree. And on that apple tree, and he was just going to go along with this whole story to tell you what seems like a simple answer. And I think that was because Jesus knew that we're drawn to stories, that our hearts are connected to one another when we share a good story, when we share an experience with each other. So Jesus didn't want to just say, I'm hanging out with those people because they need to know that I love them. Instead, he tells 3 stories. The first one is this. He tells the story of a man who had 99 sheep, or 100 sheep, and lost one. That's where we get the 99. That's where I know that Jesus would tell a math story, because he did it right here, right? So he has 100 sheep, and he loses one, and he says, will not that man go out and search for that sheep until he finds him, and he would carry him home? And all the guys in the crowd, I think, were leaning in. They're like, yeah, he would. I've done that. You see, a lot of people in this time were shepherds or had friends that were shepherds. It's like here, like everyone's in the military or knows someone who is, right? And they're like, oh yeah, I know this experience. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to search for a lost sheep. And we would totally do that. Jesus, you're right. And then he goes on to story number 2 in Story Time with Jesus. And it's the story of 10 coins and a woman who lost one. And he says, say there was a woman who had 10 coins and she lost one. Will she not search the entire house and turn the place upside down until she finds it? And you see, women at the time they were at home, like taking care of the family, like taking care of the business of running the household. And there was probably every woman in the crowd had either lost a coin, helped a friend find a coin, or been part of the celebration for that found coin. It was probably in her husband's pants from the wash, but she finds it, right? And so these women, they're leaning in. They're like, yeah, we would totally do that. I get it. Now what? And so then Jesus goes into story number 3. And story number 3 is the parable of the lost son. And that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. And here's what happens. This is Jesus' longest recorded parable in Scripture. It has the most miles on it, right? And he, I think, is telling us the importance of this topic. I think the length of this parable speaks to how important this topic is. You see, we've got everyone leaning in. And Jesus launches into this story. And I'm going to warn you, this story is a bit intense. And within the first 2 verses, I think you're going to gasp, catch your breath, and then gasp again, all right? So like that, right? Just be ready. I'm sorry. This is just how it is, right? So here's what it says. It says, Jesus continued, so story number 3. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Okay, that's fine. I get it. Nothing happened. The gasp didn't happen. I get it. Here's the thing. We have to remember that this book was written to a specific people at a specific time who would have understood this in a different way than we do today. Just like that sheep and that coin, it doesn't make as much sense until we know why he chose those stories. Here's the thing. Back then, in this culture, shame and honor were your highest things to be aware of. Your highest regard, right? If you were honored among your family, among your peers, among your neighbors, then you were seen as a distinguished, well put together person. But if the opposite was true, if you were shamed by them, then you were seen as less than, and no one would regard you or no one would think about you in a positive way. And so we need to consider the weight of this son's words. What he's actually saying, he's looking at his father and he's saying, "Hey, Dad, listen, my life would be like way better if you were just dead. And then I know that like the resources that you have, you use them pretty well to take care of our family, but I don't actually care about any of them. I want what's mine, and I want to feed my own selfish desires." Right? That's what he's saying. He's not saying like, "Hey, Dad, can I get a small loan?" He's saying, "I wish you would drop dead." And the father gives it. And I want to ask you today, how would you feel if your son or someone in your family looked you in the eye and said that? And then go so far as to say, would you actually give them what they asked for? No, nobody would do that. That's ridiculous, right? It'd be like giving a 16-year-old who just passed his driving test after the 3rd attempt a Ferrari. That's bad judgment. Someone's going to die or end up in prison or both. But this father gives it. He gives it anyway. And then this is what happens next. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Anybody surprised by that? Okay, see the Ferrari statement from earlier. After he spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And if you want to know what rock bottom looks like, this is it. This is a perfect picture of rock bottom, especially when we talk about the context of the Jewish community at the time. Pigs were untouchable according to the law of Moses. No Jewish boy would ever touch a pig, would ever look at a pig, would ever eat bacon, which is unfortunate. They would never, ever, ever get into the pig pen. And I just imagine like the crowd in this situation, just the unfathomable situation that this kid is in, right? And I just feel like because Jesus is such a master storyteller, he's probably enunciating the word pig every time he says it. He went to a pig farmer and he went to the field to feed the pigs. And every time they're like, it's bad. I'm telling you guys, it's like, that's what it was, okay? We go on to see what happens. It says, in verse 17, when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" And so this kid finally starts to come to his senses. Well, sort of, maybe. We don't know really. Was this an actual apology? Was this real repentance? Or was it an apology with a purpose? Did he want to reconnect with his family, or did he just want to survive? Either way, he decided he would return home and see if he could work the family business. Now, I have been there. My dad owned a construction company, still does to this day. And there have been times when I've needed to work for the family business. I didn't love it. It's hot where we're from. And I'm just not cut out for that type of lifestyle. And so it was bad whenever I would do it. And I knew that when I needed to go work for my dad, I didn't need skills. I didn't need a resume. I didn't need a portfolio of things that I had built with my own hands. What I needed was a really well thought out speech to tell him why it was going to be different this time. And so this son does the same thing, right? Off he goes. He's thinking, I need a good speech. I'm going to write the speech. I'm going to memorize the speech. I'm going to walk home. I'm going to say the speech. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to eat a sandwich. Boom. It's going to be great. So that's what he goes to do. It says this in verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. As I pull back from this, I remember like Jesus is telling a story here, and I think about the crowd a little bit. Like I think about the crowd in this situation, and I think that they probably are starting to have a problem with what Jesus is saying. I think at this point, they're probably like, man, this is ridiculous, all right? I don't know if you know this, Jesus, but the shame that this guy would have endured when his son said what he said is bad enough. And now you're telling me that he's gonna run? They don't do that. Distinguished men don't run in this culture. You know who runs? Criminals and slaves. This crowd has to be thinking, you know who should be running? It should be this son that's running. And he should be running away, not to, because this is going to get bad. If this is my son, I'm going to run to him, but it's not for hugs. I'm going to tell you what, I'm throwing hands, right? But this father does the unthinkable to these guys. He kissed him. He kissed the pig boy, guys. And you know about pigs? Like they smell. Okay, I'm just thinking that they're gross, they're dirty, it's covered in mud. This kid didn't say he took a shower, said he got up and went to his father. He's probably stinks. I don't know if I could have done it. And I think this crowd is probably in that same space. They're thinking, this is crazy. There's not a self-respecting Jewish man on the planet that would do this. But he does the unthinkable and he kisses him. Now that might be a weird image, but it was a customary greeting to kiss somebody that you hadn't seen in a long time, in the forehead or on the cheek or whatever, is your son, wherever it's a clean spot. Unless, of course, that person that you haven't seen is your highly offensive, very estranged, very wayward son. Your dirty, smelly, gross, wayward son who had just been with the untouchable pigs. And yet, that's what we see happen. And I think in this moment, the son realizes what he has to do. He's got to give the speech. And so he dives into the speech, and it says this in verse 21. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate, and they all lived happily ever after. It's not exactly how it went. The son begins the speech, right? I'm sure he's probably practiced it 1,000 times as he's walking home from this distant land. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy. Whew, yeah, okay, that's good. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Oh, that's even better. It's more personal. And like he gets there and he starts in the speech and the dad like runs up to him, right? Runs up to him. And I think the son's probably like, yeah, that happened. Okay, like he ran, he kissed me. He's probably just in shock. I mean, I know that I'm out of the family, but he probably doesn't want me dead. So he's just happy that I'm alive. I still got to do the speech. I need this job. I need this sandwich. Think of the sandwich. He launches into the speech and the father cuts him off. Full stop. Full stop. He doesn't let him get very far. And I wonder if you've ever had to make one of those speeches, right? Have you ever made a mistake that you knew you were going to have to own? Have you ever said something that afterwards you're like, oh, I'm going to have to come back to that one? Ever maybe broke your mom's favorite vase and you had to figure out the story of what happened? We all have. We all have. That story for me, that speech for me was the end of that story about high school. I had decided to quit high school in the middle of my senior year, which is the dumbest thing ever, right? I was so close. The finish line's right there. But I had to say that I was sorry. I had to ask people to take me back. I had to go to my teachers and say, if you'll take a chance on me, I promise it'll be worth it. And I didn't get through that speech at all, ever, at any of the times. There's something special about getting shut down in a moment like this, right? When someone looks at you and says, hey, let me stop you right there. We're good. I forgive you. I love you. I'm so happy that you're back. This pressure comes off. The relationship is restored, and everyone's able to move forward. You know, my life began to change in that season because people believed in me. People saw me. They said, you know what? He's been through this stuff. And now we know where he's at. Now we can move forward. Even when I made mistakes, I learned that I could own them. I learned that I could rebuild relationships instead of just burning them to the ground. And this father does the same thing. He doesn't let the son finish the speech. Instead, he starts shouting orders to the servants. And don't miss the orders that he shouted. He says, clean them up. Get him new clothes, get him a ring, start the dinner. All of a sudden, I just feel like, be our guest, right? He goes so far beyond what is expected at the time. See, he gives him a new robe. It would have been this new, fresh, clean robe that he could have put on after he had that much-needed shower. He gives him a ring. And this isn't jewelry, guys. This isn't not like some costume ring. This is the family ring, the signet ring. And what that ring would do is set him apart, not as a servant, but as a son. Full rights, full privileges, restored. And then he kills the fatted calf. This is not just any cow. This is the prized piece of livestock. This is a big deal. This wasn't just gonna be a party. It was gonna be a party. They were gonna throw down. And I just, again, looking back and thinking about the crowd, I think they probably are losing it. Like people are throwing stuff. They're getting angry. They're like, no way, boo. They're like booing Jesus. Everything about this story is wrong. It wouldn't happen in this culture. This kid would have been dead to the dad, literally dead. In fact, when he says this son of mine that was lost, the Greek translates to the word, you guessed it, dead. He was dead to me, and now he's alive again. And yet here we are with this father who's gone way outside of the expectations and the norms, and we want it to be happily ever after, but then we remember there's a second son. And it says in verse 24, it says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field, and when he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. The servant says, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes home, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf? He's like, Dad, are you serious right now? He hears this commotion and he gets angry. I'm not talking about like sibling rivalry or a little jealous. I'm talking about he big mad, okay? Like he's real upset. And he knows what's inside of that party. That's how you know how mad he is. He knows what's in there. The food, the fun, the fatted calf steaks. Like, come on, y'all. That's what's inside this party. That's what he's walking away from. And he decides instead of going into that party, he'd throw his own. A little pity party of one. Okay, so he's outside, mad, upset, and the father comes out. And it says that he pleaded with his son to come inside. Has this man no shame? First, he's giving up his wealth. Then he's running, and he's kissing this kid that's touched pigs. And now he's begging? Are you serious? Have you ever been to a party and you like see somebody over on the side and they're just having a bad time? Right? And sometimes you want to do the right thing. You're going to walk over to them and you're going to say, hey, I would love for you to come join the party. And in your heart, you're hoping that they say no, thank you. Because nobody wants to bring the pity party to the real party. But this father begs him to come inside. And I know that this crowd has to be losing their minds. They're like, dude, this son is right. Please just walk away. I think they're probably hoping that the son can talk some sense into his father. His anger is justified. It's totally, like, in their eyes, this kid's anger is totally justified. And then the father says his piece. He says this, my son, the father said, you were always with me. Everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and he is alive again. He was lost and is found. And that is the end of the story. It's very abrupt. We don't know what happens next. We don't know if the son decided to go into the party. We don't know if he went back to the fields to work some more. We don't know if he asked his dad, like, okay, well, since everything I have is you have is mine, let me get that. And then maybe he ran off to a distant land. We just don't know because that's the end of the story. So what happens next? Well, you tell me, because that's actually why the story matters. Because you see, the choice to go in or the choice to stay outside is the choice that we're presented with every time we come face to face with Jesus. You see, the truth is this. I've heard this passage preached a number of times, and I've preached this passage a number of times, and it always comes to this point where we ask, which one are you? Are you the wandering son that needs to repent and come home, or are you the dutiful son that actually needs to welcome the wanderer? Which one are you? That's where we land so often when we preach this passage. But can I just tell you the answer? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. We are both. We are the wanderers, and we are the ones that stay home. We are the ones that need to come home and the ones that need to open the doors. You see, we are a people that desperately need God's grace. And yet, we are also the people that he has called to demonstrate his grace to a world that desperately needs it. So what if today, instead of focusing on us, instead of focusing on where we are, we focus on who the Father is and how much he loves us? You see, this father in this story, he had the logical and legal right to cast his son out or even put him to death. In fact, according to the law of the day, that is what this son deserved. He deserved death. And yet, we don't see that from the father. Instead, we see him desperately waiting for his son and watching for him to come home. How do we know this? It says that he saw him while he was still far off. The only way to see something far off is to be looking for it. He's waiting and he's watching, and then we see him run. You see, God so desperately wants you to come home that the second you turn toward him, he will run to you with open arms. And finally, we see this father restore and redeem his son. And that's what our Father wants. He wants to restore and redeem us. He wants to make us clean from our past and give us hope for our future. So how does God feel about lost people, about those far from him? He desperately wants us to come home. See, I have 2 daughters. And admittedly, I have some high standards because I know what they are capable of. I've seen them be smart and creative and loving and generous, and that is what I want for them. More than anything, that's what I want for them. But here's also what I know, and I hope that they know too. I hope that they know that no matter what happens, no matter where they go, no matter what they do, they can always come home. And I will be waiting for them. They can come home broke. They can come home broken or sick or hurt or addicted or afflicted with whatever, and I will welcome them with open arms. And can I tell you today that the God who created you, who loves you, who sees you at your best and at your worst, desperately wants you to come home, no matter where you are. So what does it look like for you to come home today? I think for a lot of us, we've been working on the speech. Right? We've been trying to get our words together so that we can come before this God with all the reasons why he should let us back in. Or maybe we've been trying to clean up our act. We don't feel like we're part of this family. We don't feel like we have anything to offer. We need to get it together before we can come home. Or maybe we're trying to make ourselves more presentable, like clean up the language a little bit before I come into church. I don't want anybody to know that I'm an actual person. That's not what God wants from or for you. You see, in this story, the younger son, he didn't get clean before he came home. He got clean because he came home. He didn't have the means to get himself cleaned up. The Father provided those, and it's the same for us. We don't have to clean up before we come home. We need to come home so we can get clean. You don't have to change your life to enter the family of God. It is when you enter the family of God, that is when your life will begin to change for the better. Because it's Jesus' work within us that empowers us to be the people he's called us to be. So maybe for you, today's that day. Today is the day that you come home to the Father for the first time. Maybe today's the day that you step forward with Jesus and invite him to be the Lord of your life, and maybe even enter the waters of baptism today. Around here at Calvary, we say that the water is always warm, and we mean it. It is like a bathtub in there. If you want to take that step today, all you have to do is walk out the doors, find someone from the baptism team, any of our campuses, someone will help you take that step today. Here's the truth. The Father is waiting for you. So no matter who you identify with in this story, I hope you will come home because there's a party waiting and you've been invited. And I hope that you know that there's a world out there that needs an invitation from you. There's someone in your life that God has uniquely positioned you with to invite them into this party. And so I want to challenge you with that as well. Man, go out there, make a difference. What if we live like that? What if we focus on what the Father is like? What if we focus on the example that he gives? We focus on the love that he shows and the fact that that's what he's calling each and every one of us to be like. We're called to love like he loves. We're called to forgive like he forgives. And we're called to be generous like he is generous. The Father desperately wants the lost, the wandering, and the broken to come home. And he wants us who were once wandering and lost and broken to show them the way and welcome them in. What if we were that kind of church? Think of the difference we can make in the lives of everyone around us. See, we have the ultimate example of this kind of love in Jesus. Jesus was one with the Father. He lived up there. He lived in heaven and things were great. And yet he chose to come down. He chose to enter into humanity. He lived a perfect life and he died a criminal's death. Why? Because our wandering came at a price and he paid it on our behalf. So today, as we wrap up, we're going to move into a time of worship where we have the opportunity to respond to what God's calling us to. And whether that's getting baptized, whether that's needing prayer or communion, we want to make space for that. So during this time, we're going to take communion together. We're going to remember the blood that Jesus shed on our behalf, the body that was broken for each of us. If you're not ready for that, man, I just want to have you sit and just contemplate what Jesus did and who he was. But during this time, just remember him. Whatever next step he's calling you towards, I would love to help you take it. If you need prayer, I'll be around. Come find me. Any of our pastors, any of our locations would love to pray with and for you. The truth is we've been invited to this banquet, and the Father is constantly inviting us to this table to join the feast and celebrate this family. And so today as we close, let's come to the table. Let's celebrate what Jesus did and who he is. And ultimately, let's run to our Father who is waiting with open arms. God, you're so good. And Lord, we thank you for how much you love us. We thank you for the fact that you're willing to get in the midst of the mess with us and help us get out of it, to help us get clean, to help us come back into relationship with you. God, we thank you for the sacrifice and the gift of your son, Jesus, that makes it all possible. God, because without him, we had no hope. And because of him, we have this glorious hope for eternity with you. And so, God, today I pray that you would draw hearts to you and that we would run home into your open arms. We love you. It's in your name we pray.